Hi, I'm Linda Heinig of William Raveis Real Estate, and I've invited Katherine Gauthier of William Raveis Insurance to talk to you and give you a little workshop on flood insurance. Working on the shoreline, we're always running into flood insurance, and so I hope Katherine can help you out. And we know her also as Kate, so if I reference her to Kate, that's who I'm talking about. Anyways, Katherine, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Linda. I'm so excited that you asked me to do this because I know flood usually raises more questions in the home buying process than people even anticipated. It's such a rabbit hole, but I think I can boil it down and make it a little more simple to digest. So I'm just going to pull up a slideshow that I prepared for this. Let's see. Okay. And so here we are. Let's actually... Bear with me 1 second. My computer's being a little slow in screen share mode. Okay, you know what? We could do it this way. This is perfectly fine. Can you see this okay, Linda?
Yeah, thank you.
All right, so flood insurance. Let's go to our first slide. So first of all, flood is a definitive circumstance that happens to a home. And it's not necessarily just water that's existing in the home. If the water is coming from an outside source and it's entering from rainfall or from a river that's overflowed or even an ocean wave that's hitting the house, that's all considered flood because it's an external source of water. So if we're talking about anything else regarding like maybe a water heater that's leaked, or perhaps the tub gives way and it technically does flood out the living room, that's not going to be, what we're really discussing here. It's just going to be all external sources of water entering the home, and that's what we worry about when it comes to flood. Now, with that being said, if we do have an internal source of water on a homeowner's policy, there is coverage within your homeowner's insurance that's important to have, but we'll get to that later. So we're right now just going to talk about actual external source of water coming in.
Okay.
So here we go. Now, it is important to note that homeowners insurance doesn't cover anything that's flood related. It also doesn't cover landslide or earthquake because all three of those coverages are coverages that are offered under the National Flood Insurance Program. So the name itself can be a little misleading because it's not just flood that it covers. So with that being said, most properties are eligible for private flood. So we've got our National Flood Insurance Program, which is through the government, but we also have private flood. And the big difference between private flood and national flood is that with private flood, you can shop around, just like a homeowner's policy or an auto policy. You can just choose the best rate for the coverage that you need. So you get to kind of test the waters, the flood waters, and kind of see what's available to you. The only time that we can't shop the private market, there are two instances. The first is if it is an FHA loan, and the second is if there's a ton of flood losses that have already happened to the house. Anything really above one flood loss is considered a lot of flood losses because it's not really all that often that floods do occur. Or if they do occur, and it is kind of a more frequent area, then typically flood claims won't occur because this is where we're going to circle back to the homeowners. If you have a sump pump in your basement and the sump pump is kind of keeping that, incidental flood water from really filling up the basement, like say you get a few inches every rainstorm that kind of seep in, usually you have a sump pump that's pumping it back out. And it's not really destroying the basement, there's no real need to file a flood claim. So even though we're talking about, like floods not happening often, floods do happen all the time, but flood claims don't happen all that often. Usually homeowners take these other steps to, equip themselves with a sump pump and then make sure that sump pump is covered on the homeowner's policy. And that really avoids filing those flood claims because of course we always want to be able to shop around. It's always, in our best interest to just shop. Plus, who doesn't love shopping? Am I right, ladies? What's up?
Right. We love shopping.
Absolutely. Women be shopping.
I don't know about flood insurance, but we love shopping. But if it gets us a lower rate, that's good.
Right? It would be great if we could shop for flood insurance at like TJ Maxx or something. That would be fabulous if we could just parlay it with some fun shopping. But it is important to just keep in mind that FHA and frequent repetitive losses are the only things that are going to keep us out of the private market. So with that being said, if the current owner already has a national flood insurance policy. So let's say they did have an FHA loan, and maybe you have a conventional loan. So you could shop around, but their FHA rate is, or their NFIP rate that they had because they had an FHA mortgage is phenomenal. Like, let's say they're paying just a few $100s a year, and they've been established with that rate and it's locked in for them. We really always want to try to assume those policies if there's a good policy that already exists, because it's transferable by just a sign of sign on the line and keep it moving. So that takes a lot of stress out of the home buying process, but also whatever zone that home is rated in, if that changes, you are locked in at that zone. So we always want to check, is it transferable? If not, can we go shopping? And if we can't go shopping, then we have to ask, well, is there an elevation certificate? So that's always going to be step 3. So number 1, can we transfer? Number 2, can we shop? Number 3, is there an elevation certificate? And the elevation certificate is only something that the NFIP looks at. So it's special to their program. And what they say is, if your house is sitting at a certain level and that level happens to be a little bit above where they think the floodwaters are going to be super problematic, they'll give you a slight reduction in your rate. And the higher that house is, the more that rate is reduced. And if you start to see houses that are almost like on stilts, and perhaps you have like some lattice work around the bottom, those houses really should have an elevation certificate, because they are truly engineered to withstand lots of groundwater just coming in and flowing right under the house and just carrying on. Because the odds that it's gonna come up and hit that top floor and be able to stay in there, we're talking like a big tsunami wave would have to come in and really wall up the house, which does happen, but fingers crossed it'll never happen to anybody that we know. So that's really the 3-step process. Is it transferable? Can we shop? If not, is there an elevation certificate?
Yeah, I learned a lot with that. I hope everybody else did too, because I didn't know about the transferable.
Yeah, transferring is awesome. And the truth of it is that it really is just one simple phone call to the current agent. So let's say I'm the agent on it, and my wonderful realtor, Linda, not only is representing the seller in this situation, but also the buyer, because she's that good. And her buyer would like to get the seller's policy in their name. All they have to do is just give me a quick call. I send them one form, they sign it, and that's it. No more worries, no more, having to shop around or call around or fill out paperwork. It's really, truly that simple. So
That's
highly
great,
recommend.
especially on the shoreline, because there's a lot of that. And I understand we're going to be getting hurricanes this year more than thought of. And, I'm sure the floods will come up.
Yeah, that's what they're saying, that we're in for a pretty intense hurricane season. But hopefully, I always tell people, hopefully step 1, we've got a sump pump in the basement doing the brute force work, and just really forcing that water out of those basements, and let's keep them as dry as we can. Now, let's see what else we have. Oh, I love this. Do I really need flood insurance? Well, typically the standard is if the bank says so, then yes. So basically, the mortgage companies are going to require one of 2 things to be met. So let's take this pretend house, for example. Okay, so I found my dream home. My fabulous realtor, Linda, showed me this home. I'm in love. It's within my purchase power. I'm ready to go. The house is a $1 million house, and I have $1 million cash. Perfect. I can have the house, no problem. Now, let's dial it back a little bit. I still find my dream house with my wonderful realtor, Linda. It's $1 million house, but I only have $500,000 to put down. Just $500,000, just pocket change to put down. Okay. So I owe $500,000 on it. Now, the bank has to protect their interest, but they're not allowed to require anything above and beyond $250,000. So in theory, I think the thought process behind that rule, and I wasn't there when they wrote it, but I think from experience, what they were trying to go for is that the idea that the bottom floor is really the floor that would be considered a total loss in the event of a flood. It would be very rare that the entire house would be a total loss. Of course, these things do happen sometimes, but
Yeah.
it's very, very rare. So the bank can only require one of two things, either $250,000 or the amount of the mortgage. So same scenario, I show up at my dream house and it's $1 million and I only have 950,000. Whatever will I do? The bank can't require me to carry more than the additional $50,000 in coverage. So even though it's $1 million home, they can only protect either their interest or 250,000, whichever is higher.
Okay.
So, I made these slides and I'm like, oh, good question. Like I forget which slides.
This is my biggest question on the shoreline.
Sure. I'm sure you get this a lot from people because they're probably, in the market for getting the cheapest elevation certificate also, which is really good to know that you can shop around for elevation certificates. Now, typically it's, and let me just move this little box. Hang on one second. There we go. So the current owner is the person who usually has the elevation certificate. However, so let's say the current owner didn't have a mortgage. They'd have no reason to have an elevation certificate because they didn't even have flood insurance. So what's the point? So if the current owner doesn't have one, they can obtain one by either a land surveyor, an engineer, or an architect.
So any land surveyor?
Anyone who is, who's doing it actively should have the ability to do it. I know that they sometimes don't take on elevation certificates. Like sometimes you'll call somebody and they're just a little, bogged down with other things. Like I think it's sort of an ancillary service that they offer, but they're usually very happy to do it. It's unfortunately not the cheapest process to get an elevation certificate. I always tell people to plan on somewhere around $1,000 for an elevation certificate. And it's sometimes a little less and it's sometimes a little more, but that's why it's always best to shop around. And I know
that's a good point too, because I wasn't sure either. I've had a few people ask me that question and I said, maybe about $600. So I guess I should increase it a little bit.
Yeah, and there's definitely a chance you can find it for 600, and then sometimes there's a chance that you can only find it for like 1,600. So it's like it really depends on like who's out there offering it, and it's kind of one of those markets where if they're really bogged down, you might find that they're actually charging a little bit more versus maybe in the slower months you can get it for a little bit less. So I always recommend that people shop, and the good thing is about going through Raveis. I know that we have such a large team, not just in the specific office that the realtor's from, but I know that we all kind of work together as a family. So if somebody knows somebody down in, let's say like the Mystic Seaport area, they're like, oh, I have this guy and he's doing these elevation certificates for less. They tend to share that information, from office to office. And so word travels fast. So I really feel like shopping around can be made just a little bit easier if you reach out to your realtor, you reach out to, your insurance person, your lender, because everyone kind of, deals in these situations, especially on the shoreline. Like I, for one, represent the southeast shoreline of Connecticut and the state of Rhode Island for Raveis. So basically everything that I work with on an everyday basis, it's about a 50-50 chance that it's in the flood zone. So I work with a lot of realtors who have to get these for their clients. And I also, of course, can advise on flood insurance. But, it's like the more people you talk to about these kinds of things, the more, I always put it this way. It's like when your grandpa's like, oh, you got a burst pipe. Hang on, I got a guy. And he'll lick his thumb and start thumbing through his little book to find the guy. And the guy is not someone you can Google. It's not someone in the phone book. It's, no, I got a guy. Just hang on, I got a guy. So
that's one thing I liked about Raveis also is, it's easy to send a message to everybody in my office particularly, and I'm sure throughout Raveis, but they, everybody's eager to help each other find some vendors or some contractors. So yeah, that's a good point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think every day you and I are probably at some point in a blast email for our office.
Yeah.
Like, who's got a painter? Like, who's got a gutter guy? And it's like, everyone's just like, I got a guy. I also have a guy. And like, or girl, who knows? But it's always, it's always just that community of, coming together and, helping. It's almost like a preliminary shopping experience. We can sort of just put people on the right path to asking, a few different people for help. So that's how you get an elevation certificate. Now, I always tell people though, elevation certificates, remember, is step 3. So again, we always want to try to assume the current policy, then shop the private market, then look for the elevation certificate, because the elevation certificate only counts for the NFIP. So if we know we're going NFIP, but there's no current policy, then we go for the elevation certificate. So it's kind of a last stop, but what it does is it really makes the Hail Mary pass happen. It can take a situation where it's like, oh gosh, I have an FHA loan. My flood insurance was going to be like $7,500, let's say, in the NFIP. But then you get this elevation certificate and the rate drops down to, let's say, $3,000. You're like, wow, like I saved more than 50% of something that was like going to be, a huge financial burden. All of a sudden has been more than halved by this elevation certificate, and it comes from the seller. So it's a nice thing for the seller to be able to help move that property a little faster. But if we're in a seller's market, sometimes you find that elevation certificates aren't usually, floating around as often. If it doesn't already exist, odds are they're not going to spring for one because, they'll probably end up finding either a cash buyer or a conventional buyer. So
Right.
always step 3. But that's good because when we don't have to go NFIP and we can shop the private market, I'm really happy to share this with that. When I started with Raveis just 2 years ago, I had been doing insurance already for 10 years when I moved here. And in 10 years, I always had this general idea of what flood costs. And the general idea was like, okay, if it's in the AE zone, which we're going to get into zones next. But if it's in the AE zone, I would think about 4,000. And if it's in the VE zone, I would think about 8,000. And that's why this next slide is so important. So now with the private market, what we're finding is that AE quotes are coming in around 1,000. And this is very new. And VE quotes are coming in just around maybe like 3,000 or 4,000. So we've completely eliminated these these astronomical flood premiums, except in a few instances. There's still a few properties floating around out there that are truly just oceanfront homes that really need the high level of protection because they just get walloped year after year. But they're usually just absolutely gorgeous houses. So, they still are worth it. But, what we end up finding is that we have our 3 flood zones, and X means no flood needed. If you get a zone X, that is like a hands up, like it's party time. I am buying this house. Nothing's going to stop me. But AE used to be one of those things where like you had to put the brakes on, like, oh no, it's AE. That's 4,000 in flood. And then I also have, maybe 1,500 in homeowners. Then, oh my goodness, the taxes. And before you know it, you're like, oh, like that's another, maybe $10,000 a year total that we're talking that can really put a damper on purchase power. It can really make you have to move on to the next house. But the private market, I am so thrilled to report that, in just the last few weeks, I was able to secure AE flood coverage for less than $500 for multiple properties.
Wow.
So we really get lucky. I try to say the average is around $1,200 for AE because there are still instances where they're coming in higher, and I don't like to build people's hopes up too high. But every time I quote an AE, it really is like I wonder what we're going to get. It's like a kid on Christmas.
Yeah.
Who knows? And I click it, and like sometimes it's really exciting stuff. So it used to be AE was like oh no, but now AE is like, okay, so it's definitely made a shift in the last few years. And then with VE, it's kind of similar. I had a VE quote come in the other day. I couldn't even believe it. It was right under $2,000. It was $1,778. Yeah. And so the difference there is huge. But then again, I had a VE one the other day that came in at 8,000. So it's like, ooh, you really never know. But that's really how it ends up stacking up, is like X, you can just like keep it moving. You are all set. But AE and VE, it's always so important to shop, because in those instances where I got those really great rates, trust me, there are a few private carriers that were not offering those great rates, but they would gladly write the insurance. So always, always, always shop around.
Now, it also has to do with the way the house sits in that flood zone, correct? So like I could have a house in an AE and a VE, or I can have a house in an AE or and an X, or the property, I should say. So it really depends where that house is situated, right? And which zone that is.
And that's why it's so important to get a zone determination. I run them all day, every day for my realtors. It just takes like 2 seconds to look up the address. And what it does is it takes it from those maps I'm sure you're familiar with at town hall, where you're squinting and you're like, is it, isn't it? You know, like, because the property line can be like so close to the next zone. And what it does is it takes the property out of the equation, because the bank doesn't care about the land. The land's not going anywhere. It's the house they're worried about. So when I do a zone determination, it tells you exactly where that house sits. If it's on one of those lines where it's like, well, the property has a corner of the property in AE, well, the house isn't in that corner, so we are all set at Zone X. And that's like just a really exciting moment when when it looks like it might be, but then it ends up not being.
We can really get excited about insurance.
I know. It's so funny. Like, I try so hard to get people on that level, because I'm like, oh, this is so awesome. And they're like, is it though? It's still insurance. I'm like, yes, it's so cool, because every little tiny thing that changes, every little, little victory where, oh, we don't need flood insurance, or, oh, we got an amazing deal on the homeowners. It's like, it can make all the difference in the home buying process. And that has really sparked my interest again in insurance. After doing insurance for 10 years, just at I was still a producer like I am now, which means I write, I just write a bunch of new business. I know where to put it. I know how to shop around. That's my specialty. After 10 years of doing it, not for home buyers, I was doing it just at a regular agency. So it could be anybody who's in need of a shop around, or who's maybe just had it with their company and they're like, they're angry or whatever it may be. It wasn't even close to how fun it's been doing it for Raveis, because at Raveis, by the time someone's talking to me, it means they see the finish line. By the time you're getting insurance, it's like I am the last stop before you get the clear to close. So they're excited, and like every little dollar counts. Like the other day, I ended up saving someone just $3 at issuance because I moved one thing around, and they were like, "That's so awesome!" And I'm like, "Heck yes, we can get excited about $3." Like, it's just, they're so excited by the time they get to me that I'm like, yeah, like that $3 can turn into, who knows, like maybe you can get like a cute candle on clearance at TJ Maxx for your new mantle. Like, who knows? It's like every little dollar adds up. So I've really just enjoyed my time here so much, because by the time they get to me, they are just so ready to close, and I'm so ready to help them get there.
Yep, I know that feeling. I just, that's the best part about working in real estate, is because it's fun working with the people and seeing them happy. And there's so many places where the flood zone, really the flood insurance had gotten out of control since Sandy. Mm-hmm. And it seems like you're lately being able to find different policies to help people in those areas. So lots of gratitude for your expertise in that.
Thank you. Of course. And that's also something that's so exciting, is that if you have flood insurance and you hate your rate, it's like so bad. If you have your renewal coming up, I always tell people, give it 2 months time. Always shop a little early, because you need time to get the bank on board and to get it switched over. But that's been such an exciting, fun changeover, has been watching people take their existing flood insurance and getting it moved to private, because maybe private wasn't available to them when they purchased, or maybe they've had the home for so long that they didn't even realize that it could be better. Like, I had this one, it was so uplifting. It was a home, it was a secondary home, and it was owned by 5 siblings in a trust. Oh, wow. And the siblings had made it to their 80s. So they've really earned this vacation home that has been passed down to them. But there was a need for flood insurance on it, and the flood policy was $11,000. Yeah. So between the 5 siblings, they would all put in just over $2,000 a year. And in their mind, because it's split between 5 people, they're like, well, the flood's $2,000 a year. And for most of us, flood being $2,000 a year, we're like, that's pretty good. But when you look at the big picture, you're like, but that is over $11,000 a year for this flood. Like, can we not do better? And so I was thrilled because this person ended up in my inbox on a recommendation of one of, the realtors that they were friends with here at Raveis. And we were able to write it for $1,200. So they saved over $10,000 per year by making this changeover. So what they're going to do is take that savings. The mortgage that's left on the house is very small. They took out a second mortgage on it. It was already paid off. And then they did, I believe it was a home equity line of credit to just do some repairs on it and stuff. So because they had the mortgage, they had to have the flood, and they've just had it ever since. So now that savings for just 1 year.
Sorry about that.
That's fine. Their savings for just 1 year, though, is going to make it so that they can just pay off what they owe, and then they never have to buy flood insurance again. So it's always important, like not just for new home buyers, but just for anybody. If you already have flood insurance, don't be afraid to shop around, because you never know what's going to be out there waiting for you until you search. And that is going to bring me to our last slide, which is, how do I get a flood insurance quote? Which is pretty simple. You get it by talking to an agent like me. So that's basically it. I know you have a tickle in your throat, Linda. I hope you're okay. And hopefully you get a nice glass of water to flood that tickle right out of there, and you can move on with your—
Sorry about that.
That's okay. That's okay.
Allergy season.
Oh my gosh, it's relentless. Once you get that tickle, it doesn't go away no matter what you do.
No. So anyways, Kate, I want to thank you very much for this. I'm not going to say too much because I think I'm losing my voice. But thank you very much for this insurance seminar. And if anybody has questions, please contact Kate.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Linda. I really appreciate it. And
thank you.
Here's my contact info if anybody needs it. Call me anytime, email me anytime. I'm always happy to help. Thank you again for doing this. This is a great idea.
Thank you.